As foreign forces leave Afghanistan, the Taliban advances. After 2 decades of war, the last U.S. troops depart in the dead of night. Does their exit inadvertently pave the way for the Taliban to return to power? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the withdrawal of foreign forces from Afghanistan. In October 2001, U.S. forces invaded Afghanistan with a mission to depose the Taliban while destroying al-Qaeda and capturing its leader, Osama bin Laden. It took just a few months for the Taliban to collapse, but that, in hindsight, was the easy part. Taliban fighters retreated, and over the course of 2 decades, they carried out a violent insurgency. Even with 100,000 U.S. troops on the ground, the Taliban continued to make gains. Then, in 2018, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani invited the Taliban to peace talks as a legitimate political party with a chance to reintegrate into Afghanistan's government. So in 20 years, it seems the Taliban has almost come full circle. And many are asking if the sacrifice of foreign troops was worth it. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. Now, since 2001, more than 47,000 Afghan civilians have been killed. 2.7 million have been forced to flee, most of them to Iran and Pakistan. 4 million others have been displaced. Almost 2,500 U.S. troops have been killed in action, while more than 20,000 have been wounded. And the financial cost to the U.S. has been a staggering $2.26 trillion. So you can see why so many are desperate for this conflict to end. But is Washington simply abandoning the Afghan government and its people to an emboldened Taliban? Well, Bagram Air Base was once the heart of the U.S. military operation in Afghanistan, home to thousands of troops. But last week, U.S. forces left very quietly. Today, the base is guarded by the Afghan military, but now that the Taliban has taken other former U.S. bases, many fear that they could try to take Bagram and Kabul next as peace negotiations falter.
With the withdrawal of international troops from Afghanistan, the war has intensified greatly. The withdrawal of these forces has naturally left gaps in some places, and unfortunately, the Taliban has taken advantage of this opportunity. Although both negotiating teams are in Doha and there are contacts between them, we did not see any progress in the negotiations.
So what did 20 years of foreign troops achieve, and is the Taliban close to regaining power? To discuss that, I'm joined from Doha by Dr. Habiba Sarabi, a member of the Afghan peace negotiation team. From Kabul is Enayat Najafizada. He is the founder and CEO of the Institute of War and Peace Studies. And from New York, Adam Weinstein, a former U.S. Marine who served in Afghanistan, and he is now a research fellow at the Quincy Institute. Thanks all so much for being with us. Adam, let me start with you. You know, the United States didn't enter Afghanistan in 2001 to help the Afghan people. You know, building a democratic Afghan government was really a byproduct of a mission to bring security to the United States after September 11th. So today, to see the Taliban, al-Qaeda's best friends, regaining so much territory and getting, let me say, anxiously close to returning to power, what did the U.S. achieve in its own interest over the last 20 years? And are you not scared about what could happen?
Well, first of all, when we talk about territory, I think we too often focus on ground instead of people. I think we should be focusing on who has control over where Afghans actually live. And if you look at that, then many of the districts that the Taliban are capturing are not very strategic and don't have that many people living in them, whereas the Afghan security forces are maintaining control over population centers, at least for now. So I think that's an important distinction. We too often get caught up on the map, and a lot of that land is not even inhabited by very many people. In terms of what the United States accomplished, I think we did degrade al-Qaeda. We didn't defeat al-Qaeda. But in many ways, the U.S. mission in Afghanistan was a failure. And that's something that U.S. leaders and the U.S. public needs to grapple with.
Right. So al-Qaeda is degraded but not defeated. And given that there are so many underpopulated areas, as you were saying, in Afghanistan that the Taliban now has control of. Is the United States not inadvertently providing, again, a safe haven for terrorists to regroup in Afghanistan?
Well, the Taliban have control over some of these districts in the sense that they drive in a few Hilux trucks and plant a flag and take a photo op and use it as propaganda. And many of the strategic districts are quickly retaken by Afghan security forces. So I don't want to exaggerate that. It is disturbing to see some of the equipment that the Taliban has been able to capture. In terms of safe havens, I think a better way to look at it was, is the risk of terrorism worth an indefinite U.S. deployment of troops to Afghanistan? And I don't think it is worth it.
I mean, the question for so many people, Adam, I'm going to stick with you for one more question, is whether Daesh will actually look to Afghanistan as a potential safe haven for their own regrouping. I mean, the Taliban has agreed to cut ties with terrorist groups, but they can just simply turn a blind eye.
Well, Daesh and Taliban are strategic competitors. Of course, the environment of insecurity and terrorism that the Taliban has created has also enabled Daesh to gain a foothold, even though Daesh and the Taliban fight each other at times. I don't think Daesh has enough legitimacy to gain a major foothold in Afghanistan long term.
What about Al-Qaeda then?
Well, Al-Qaeda is still an issue. I agree that that's a concern, but it came down to, at least for President Biden, a balancing test. Is the risk of Al-Qaeda worth the cost of a permanent U.S. deployment to Afghanistan and permanent intervention? And I think the Biden administration determined that it wasn't.
Okay. Enayat, let me turn to you. You said that you think if Afghan forces and the government continue to get financial and technical support from the United States and from NATO, they can effectively contain the Taliban. What gives you that confidence?
I think the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces have already proved it on the ground that they are able to contain the Taliban. They have the capability to fight the Taliban. It's crystal clear that today in Badghis province in the west of Afghanistan, the Taliban attacked on the provincial capital of Badghis. The Afghan special forces were able to contain the Taliban and push them out of the city. I believe as long as the financial, political, and technical support of the US and NATO continues to the Afghan forces, I think the Afghan forces have the capability to continue fighting the Taliban and keep them at bay.
Okay. Let me ask, though, if a deteriorating security situation in Afghanistan actually does become manifest and becomes a threat again to Western nations, do you think the U.S. or NATO might be able to re-enter Afghanistan at some point, or would that be completely impossible, unlike in 2001?
I believe a strong 350,000 Afghan national defense and security forces have the capability to fight the Taliban. Of course, there are concerns, there are fears. Taliban have gained ground over the past 2 months. More than 100 districts fell to the Taliban. But I believe that as long as the financial and political support of the US and NATO continues, the Afghan forces are able to contain the Taliban. The Afghan forces have already taken some of the districts from the Taliban back in the past couple of weeks.
You know, it's interesting, though, Enayat, I have to say, so many of the correspondents I've spoken to that are on the ground in Afghanistan and covering each individual Taliban attack on Afghan forces will tell me that the forces in Afghanistan are so demoralized. They feel abandoned, so many of them. They just don't have the strength, the proper training, the proper equipment, and the proper support of a strong enough government to keep going and to fight the Taliban, which is why we saw them actually run into Tajikistan at one point when they were cornered by Taliban forces. Are these correspondents exaggerating, do you think? Are we not giving Afghan security forces enough credit?
I think on a number of occasions it happened. The Afghan forces have retreated into Tajikistan. I think the withdrawal of the American forces have demoralized the Afghan forces. I believe the previous security sector leadership was flawed. We have got a new security leadership here in Kabul, and the support from the US and NATO forces will enable the Afghan forces to continue fighting the Taliban and make a superiority on the ground, so it pushed the Taliban back to the negotiating table. I believe as long as we do not defeat the Taliban on the ground, the Taliban would not come back to the negotiating table in Doha.
You think they will come back to the negotiating table?
I believe the politics of battleground is going to determine the future of the Afghan peace process. As long as we defeat the Taliban on the battlefield in the next couple of months, I believe the Taliban will come back to the negotiating table, and they will come back and seek a political solution to the Afghan conflict.
Okay, then how confident are you that that's what we will actually see?
It is difficult to guarantee, but the fight is fierce at the moment. The fight is ongoing in almost 28 to 30 provinces. More than 100 districts have fallen to the Taliban, and the fighting is still ongoing across the country. So I think we have to wait and see how the fight will go in the next couple of months across the country. So it will determine the fate of the Afghan peace process.
Okay, there is a lot at stake here then in the next few weeks and few months. Habiba, my apologies for taking this long to get to you, but I have something more pointed for you as well. I mean, you're part of the negotiation committee. The Taliban, backed out of the last round of peace talks in Turkey, which doesn't exactly demonstrate the most serious commitment to the talks. The U.S., pulled out anyway, the Taliban says, with its tail between its legs. How can the Taliban, do you think, not see this as a, complete surrender of U.S. forces and a victory for them in exchange for very few actual concessions?
Yes, Taliban unfortunately rejected the Turkey conference because they thought that it's a kind of co-op for this for the current peace negotiation in Doha. So they were afraid that maybe there will be some decision that they will not be happy with that. So that's why they rejected that. But of course, from the other side, the negotiation in Doha didn't stop. And so oftenly the negotiation is going on. And recently we had a kind of serious negotiation in Doha. But I definitely agree with my brother Enayat that the situation in Afghanistan, especially on the ground between the Afghan Defense Force and Taliban, will make some difference in Doha. Otherwise, they think that they can get upper hand for this getting or increasing the violence inside Afghanistan. So this is something that they were thinking about that, and they thought that maybe by force, by violence, they can get many things, more advantage in the negotiation table.
More leverage. I mean, they continue to be able to declare these victories. And they also say, Habiba, we've actually spoken about this before, they say they've changed. For example, they do want their women educated now. I want to ask you if you believe them, and overall, how much trust really is there that no matter what's decided in these negotiations, the Taliban will stick to their promises if control and power is ceded to them?
At the negotiation table, the experience and the time will prove that they are really interested or willing for a real negotiation or meaningful negotiation. But some things which is happening for this, or they are talking about the women issue or the women's rights. So we can get report from inside Afghanistan, from some provinces, for example, in Takeover, in the north part of Afghanistan, in Balkh province, in Shulgar district, and also from Logar that they are not respecting women's rights, and whenever they are capturing these districts, they are making announce on the mosque that women cannot go to out of their home, and even they cannot go to clinic for treatment, and they threaten the doctors to not examine the women that if they don't have any male accompany. These sort of experience or report can show that they don't believe the women rights, and so that's why, of course, but there is some difference between the people or the fighters of Taliban that they are on the ground, but the people who are sitting in Doha, political figure that they want to show to the world that they have been changed. So this is a slightly different between these two groups or two type of people or two type of Taliban.
Right. I mean, some argue if they've never bothered with women's empowerment before, why would they now if they'll be accountable really to no one anyway? It's a serious concern, and so much of this really just depends on trusting what is now a political party that really hasn't shown good faith before to carry out meaningful reforms in the interest of especially women's rights. Adam, let me come back to you, though, because many are saying that the next few weeks and months will actually reveal whether or not Afghanistan is set to return to all-out civil war. Do you see that as a realistic scenario?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's a potential scenario. I mean, Afghanistan has been essentially at civil war, but it could become a more intense civil war. I think what's important is that the Afghan government and Afghan security forces remain cohesive and unified. I agree that if the United States continues to provide financial and technical support, which it says it will do, that the ANDSF will be able to hold population centers and fight the Taliban. I think there's a lot of media attention on situations where the Taliban temporarily retake a district, often a district that was poorly supplied and cut off from supply routes, and they parade around with their trucks and their flags, and that makes the news. But then we don't see the second act, which is that Afghan commandos retake that district, and they retake the strategic districts, and they hold population centers. So I don't think the situation on the ground is good, but I don't think it's as dismal as some might believe. I think the ANDSF are a capable fighting force so long as they remain cohesive and they don't begin to break into factions. And that could make violence surge because neither the Taliban nor the ANDSF can completely win the war through force alone. That's why the political settlement and the negotiation process is so important. And that's why it's important for regional countries, especially Pakistan, but also Iran, China, Russia, and the United States, for that matter, need to put pressure on both sides, but especially on the Taliban, to make concessions at the negotiating table and come to a compromise and realize that the future of Afghanistan cannot be dictated by force, and there won't be any kind of international legitimacy given to a government that comes to power through force alone.
Okay. Enayat, I could see you agreeing with at least part of what Adam was saying there. I want to ask something else of you, because you were, again, on the ground. And knowing that the Taliban has now rejected Turkey's plan to operate and protect Kabul airport because it says Turkey is a member of NATO. What could be the consequences there if that airport is not left under foreign-administered protection?
I think that airport is of strategic importance for the Afghan government, for the foreign embassies in Kabul. I think maintaining the Kabul International Airport is of importance for the diplomatic missions, for the Afghan government, and for the international aid organizations. So the Kabul airport needs the maintenance of an international agency. So the Turkey's agreement to maintain the Kabul airport beyond the US-led NATO withdrawal is very important for the continuation of fight against the Taliban, for the continuation and flow of the development and aid to the Afghan people and to the Afghan government.
Okay. I would like to listen to now Suhail Shaheen. He is the Taliban spokesperson. He spoke to TRT World actually on Tuesday. He was asked about that refusal, the Taliban's refusal to allow Turkish troops to protect Kabul's airport, in part to guarantee security for foreigners, diplomats, and others there, and also whether foreign NGO workers and diplomats might also be expected to leave Afghanistan. Let's hear what he said.
About NGO workers, diplomats, embassies, consulates, we are committed that we will provide a secure environment for their functioning. Our people need that, and we also want a good relation with all countries of the world. In future, when an Islamic government is in place, even now, we do not target embassies, consulate, workers of NGOs. So that is our commitment.
It sounds quite conciliatory. Habiba, do you have faith that the Taliban will work well with foreign NGOs operating on the ground as well as diplomats?
Unfortunately, experience on the ground shows that it's not the same. For example, when Taliban capture some places, for example, in the Farah province, they blown up the district governor building. They also destroyed the technical institute in Baghlan province. So they destroyed the schools that it was for the children. If they don't, how we can trust if they don't respect their own property, the Afghan property? So how we can trust that they can protect the embassies, NGOs, and these sort of things? So this is something that evidence and report shows on the ground that they are not doing whatever they are saying.
Mm-hmm. Adam, your thoughts there?
Well, I think the Taliban need to decide whether they want to be a political movement in Afghanistan that has governance capabilities, or whether they want to remain some sort of revolutionary insurgency, or however they view themselves. The country cannot function without a secure airport, and the international community simply won't trust the Taliban to secure the airport. The best option, I think, is to have a third party secure the airport at this juncture. In terms of have the Taliban changed, they haven't demonstrated that they changed. And their actions are going to matter more than their words in Doha. And I think it was a very good point that they have destroyed infrastructure that could have even been useful to the Taliban if they gained political control. So I think the Taliban are going to have to demonstrate that they understand how modern governance works. And that embassies are going to require their own security, and the airport is going to require security that can be trusted. And nobody is going to maintain a diplomatic mission based on the word of the Taliban alone.
Right. And Enayat, the Taliban has seen so much war and so much horror, not just over the last 20 years, but for decades even before that, when they were fighting Soviet forces in Afghanistan for so many years as well. Is it logical to expect them to suddenly be able to transform into a functioning political party, to play a serious role in leadership and democracy after what they've been through and what the definition of their existence has been for this many decades?
It's hard to believe the Taliban. The Taliban are following a double game. They are saying one thing at the negotiating table in Doha, but they are doing something different on the ground. The Taliban's behaviors in the areas and territories that they have gained over the past 2 months suggest otherwise. So imagine if the Taliban take the control of a provincial capital. What are they going to offer to the Afghan people in that particular province?
Right.
They have nothing to offer except violence. So therefore, I believe a military solution to this conflict is not possible. The return of the Islamic Republic is something unacceptable to the Afghan people. There is a new Afghanistan, Afghanistan has improved and progressed so much over the past two decades. And I believe the Afghan government, the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces are going to fight the Taliban.
Supposed to be
the Taliban should come to
politically?
this conclusion. I think they have to come back to the negotiating table. They have to seek a political solution to this conflict. There is no military victory in this conflict. As long as they pursue a military strategy, as long as they're in pursuance of a military takeover and the return of this a military takeover to Afghanistan, I think it will lead to a bloody civil war in Afghanistan.
Okay.
That will be a disaster for the Afghan people, for Afghanistan, and it will be
Indeed.
It will not be in the interest of anyone in this country.
It's a danger to the world. Okay, Enayat, unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it there because we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. We'll see you next time.